Jedediah lived a simple life. Sunrise meant chores, and sunset meant a lonely dinner in his quiet, wood-framed house. The ranch, nestled deep in a valley where the wind howled like a hungry wolf, had been in his family for generations. But now it was just him. The work was endless, from mending fences to tending the cattle. Lately, though, Jedediah found himself wishing for something more. Not necessarily company, though that would be nice, but help. Specifically, a cook. Someone to ease the burden of preparing meals after a long day's work. He wasn't getting any younger, and the endless cycle of chores and cooking was starting to wear him down. He needed someone who could whip up a decent stew or bake a loaf of bread without burning it to a crisp. Maybe then he could focus on the ranch itself and less on surviving. Maybe he could find some peace. The ranch house stood as a testament to resilience. Built from sturdy timber, it had weathered countless storms. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged a little, but the structure itself was solid. Inside, a large stone fireplace dominated the main room, offering warmth against the biting winds. The furniture was simple and functional. A worn leather armchair, a sturdy wooden table, and a few hand-me-down chairs. The kitchen, though small, was equipped with a wood-burning stove and shelves lined with jars of preserves from summers past. Outside, the barn stood a little ways from the house, a haven for the livestock. The whole place was surrounded by acres of rolling hills, dotted with grazing cattle. It was a beautiful, if isolated, place. A place where a person could feel both incredibly small and incredibly free. But lately, Jedediah felt mostly small. Determined to find some help, Jedediah hammered a weathered piece of wood to a post near the entrance of his property. In big, bold letters, he painted "Cook Wanted." He hoped someone passing by might see it and be interested. He also placed a small advertisement in the local newspaper in the nearest town, Harmony Gulch, a good 3-hour ride away. The ad was simple. Ranch seeks experienced cook. Room and board provided. Inquire at the Double J Ranch. He paid for the smallest ad possible, hoping it would be enough. Harmony Gulch wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis, but it was the closest thing to civilization he had. He figured if anyone was looking for work, they might check the local paper. Now, all he could do was wait and hope someone, anyone, would answer his call. He just really needed someone to cook. His hopes were soon challenged. The sky, which had been a clear, crisp blue, began to darken ominously. The wind picked up, howling with increasing ferocity. Soon, fat snowflakes began to fall, swirling and dancing in the wind. It was the beginning of a blizzard, a fierce one by the looks of it. Jedediah knew what that meant. Isolation. The roads would be impassable, and the ranch would be cut off from the rest of the world. Any hope of someone seeing his sign or reading the ad in Harmony Gulch dwindled with each passing snowflake. He sighed, resigned to his fate. It seemed he would be cooking for himself for a while longer. He hurried to secure the barn and bring in extra firewood, bracing himself for the storm. This was going to be a long one. Just as Jedediah settled in for a solitary evening, a faint sound cut through the howling wind. A knock. He frowned. Who in their right mind would be out in this weather? He cautiously approached the door, peering through the small window. He couldn't believe his eyes. Standing on his porch, covered in snow, was a young woman. She was thin, her face pale with cold, and her eyes wide with desperation. Wrapped tightly in her arms was a small bundle. A baby. Jedediah hesitated. He hadn't seen another soul in weeks, let alone a woman with a newborn. He opened the door a crack, the wind nearly ripping it from his grasp. "Can I help you?" he asked gruffly, his voice barely audible above the storm. He wasn't expecting this. Not at all. Jedediah's brow furrowed. This was not how he envisioned finding a cook. He had imagined a sturdy woman, maybe a little older, with calloused hands and a warm smile, ready to take charge of the kitchen. Not this. A waif of a girl, barely more than a child herself, clinging to a baby in the midst of a blizzard. He was a practical man, not one for sentimentality. He ran a ranch, not a charity. The thought of taking in a stranger, especially one with a baby, filled him with a sense of dread. It would be nothing but trouble. I'm looking for shelter, the young woman stammered, her voice trembling as much as her body. Just for the night. Please. Jedediah's gaze flickered from her pleading eyes to the tiny, bundled form in her arms. He hesitated again, his gruff exterior battling with a flicker of something softer inside. All right, Jedediah grumbled, his voice rough around the edges. Get in here before we both freeze solid. He swung the door open wider, allowing the woman to stumble inside. He quickly shut it again, cutting off the biting wind. He gestured towards the fireplace with a curt nod. Get yourselves warmed up. I'll get you some blankets. He kept his distance, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes narrowed. He didn't offer a smile or a word of welcome. He was doing this out of necessity, not out of kindness, or so he told himself. He watched her carefully as she huddled near the fire, unwrapping the baby. He couldn't help but notice the way she gently cradled the infant, her touch filled with tenderness. But still, he remained aloof, his initial reluctance clinging to him like the cold outside. This was going to be a long night. After retrieving some thick wool blankets from the attic, Jedediah tossed them to the woman, careful not to get too close. So, he began, his voice still gruff. What's your story? He needed to know why a young woman with a baby was out in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard. The woman hesitated, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. My name is Alara, she said softly, and this is my daughter, Lily. She looked down at the baby, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sadness. I was traveling, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Things didn't work out. I needed to leave. She didn't elaborate, but Jedediah could sense the pain and desperation in her voice. I just need a place to stay for a little while, she pleaded. Until the storm passes. Jedediah rubbed his chin, considering her words. He wasn't a fool. He knew she wasn't telling him the whole story, but he also knew that she was desperate. He glanced out the window at the raging blizzard. He couldn't just turn them out into that. The house is small, he said, his voice softening slightly. And I don't have much to spare. He paused, then continued. You can stay in the barn. It's not much, but it's dry and out of the wind. There's some hay for bedding. Alara's eyes widened with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. Jedediah turned away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. He wasn't doing this to be thanked. He was just doing what needed to be done. Don't get any ideas, he muttered, turning back to her. It's just for a few nights, until the storm passes. Then you'll have to move on. The barn was cold and drafty, but it was shelter. Jedediah led Alara and Lily to a corner filled with fresh hay. He lit a lantern, casting a warm glow on their small space. He pointed to a pile of blankets. That should keep you warm enough. Then, without another word, he turned and left, retreating back to the warmth of his house. Alara sighed, exhaustion washing over her. She carefully laid Lily down on the hay, tucking the blankets around her. Then, she began to tidy up their small corner, sweeping away loose hay and arranging the blankets into a makeshift bed. She even managed to find a clean spot to change Lily's diaper. Despite her weariness, Alara was determined to make the best of their situation. She was grateful for the shelter, and she would do everything she could to earn Jedediah's goodwill. She knew she and Lily were a burden, but she hoped to prove that they were worth the trouble. The next morning, Jedediah went to the barn to tend to the animals. He expected to find Alara and Lily still huddled under the blankets, but he was surprised to see Alara already up and about. She had swept the entire barn, not just their corner, and had even started mucking out the stalls. Lily was nestled in a makeshift cradle Alara had fashioned from a wooden crate and some blankets. She was cooing softly, seemingly content. Jedediah watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He couldn't deny that Alara was resourceful. She had taken initiative and made the barn cleaner than it had been in months. He still wasn't sure about her, but he had to admit, She wasn't afraid of hard work. He cleared his throat. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice gruff as always. "Just trying to earn my keep," Alara replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "And make this place a little more comfortable for Lily." She glanced at the baby, her eyes softening. Jedediah followed her gaze. He watched as Alara gently stroked Lily's cheek, her touch feather-light. He saw the way Lily's tiny fingers grasped Alara's, the way she gurgled and smiled at her mother. There was an undeniable bond between them, a connection that was both powerful and tender. He had never been around babies much. He hadn't really understood the fuss people made over them. But watching Alara with Lily, he began to see something different. He saw a love that was pure and unconditional, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of warmth sparked within him, thawing the ice around his heart. He still wasn't ready to admit it, but he was starting to soften. As the days passed, the blizzard continued to rage, trapping them all at the ranch. Alara, true to her word, started helping with small chores around the ranch. She fetched water, gathered eggs, and even helped Jedediah mend fences when the weather allowed. She was quick to learn and willing to do whatever was needed. Jedediah, though he never said it out loud, appreciated her help. It eased his burden and allowed him to focus on other tasks. He started leaving her small tasks to do, and she would diligently complete them. He noticed she never complained, even when the work was hard or the weather was miserable. She seemed grateful for the opportunity to contribute, to be useful. He still maintained his gruff exterior, but inside he was starting to see Alara in a new light. She wasn't just a burden. She was becoming a helper. Jedediah stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes. He saw more than just the fire, though. He saw a woman with bright eyes and a warm smile, her hair the color of sunshine. Sarah. Is Sarah. Flashback. They were young, full of dreams. They had planned to build a life together on the ranch, to raise a family. He had even started building a cradle, just like the one Alara had made for Lily. But then tragedy struck. A sickness swept through the town, and Sarah was one of its victims. He lost her, and with her he lost his hope. He never finished the cradle. He never found another love. He buried himself in work, trying to forget the pain. But the memories lingered, haunting him in the quiet moments. End flashback. Now, watching Alara and Lily, those memories resurfaced, bringing with them a bittersweet ache. He realized he had closed himself off to the possibility of love and happiness, afraid of being hurt again. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to open his heart again. One evening, Alara decided to try and cook dinner. She wanted to show Jedediah her appreciation, and she figured a good meal would do the trick. She found some potatoes, onions, and carrots in the root cellar and decided to make a simple stew. Unfortunately, Alara had very little cooking experience. She added too much salt, burned the onions, and undercooked the potatoes. The resulting stew was a complete disaster. When Jedediah tasted it, his face contorted in a grimace. He tried to swallow it but couldn't. He burst out laughing, a hearty laugh that shook his entire body. Alara, mortified, started to apologize, but then she saw the humor in the situation and joined in the laughter. It was the first time Jedediah had truly laughed since Sarah died. The stew was awful, but the shared laughter was wonderful. The next day, Jedediah found Alara looking dejected. "I'm sorry about the stew," she said quietly. "I really wanted to do something nice." Jedediah shrugged, trying to hide a smile. "Well," he said, "it wasn't exactly the best stew I ever had, but don't worry about it." Then, to her surprise, he added, "I can teach you how to cook, if you want." Alara's face lit up. "Really?" she asked. Jedediah nodded. "Yeah, really. Someone's got to do the cooking around here." And so, Jedediah began teaching Alara the basics: how to chop vegetables, how to season meat, how to bake bread. He showed her his grandmother's recipes, passed down through generations. He found himself enjoying the process, and Alara was a willing and eager student. He was getting the cook he wanted, just not in the way he expected. The blizzard showed no signs of stopping. The wind howled relentlessly, and the snow piled up higher and higher. Jedediah, worried about the cold in the barn, invited Alara and Lily to stay in the main house. With the three of them confined to the small space, they inevitably spent more time together. Alara helped Jedediah with chores inside the house, like mending clothes and cleaning. Lily, now more comfortable, started to crawl around, exploring her surroundings. Jedediah found himself watching Lily with a sense of amusement. He'd never been around a baby for so long, and he was fascinated by her every move. He even started talking to her, making silly faces and funny noises, much to Alara's amusement. The house, once so quiet and lonely, was now filled with the sounds of laughter and baby babble. As the evenings grew longer, Jedediah started sharing stories of the ranch with Alara. He told her about his grandparents, who had first settled the land, and about his parents, who had worked tirelessly to make it thrive. He spoke of the hardships they had faced, the droughts, the floods, the blizzards. He even told her about Sarah, his voice softening as he recalled their time together. He showed her old photographs, faded and worn, but still filled with the joy of their youth. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, dreams that had been shattered by Sarah's death. Alara listened intently, her eyes filled with empathy. She understood his pain, his loss, his loneliness. She encouraged him to talk, to share his memories, to keep Sarah's spirit alive. She was a good listener, and Jedediah found himself opening up to her in ways he never thought possible. In turn, Alara began to share her own story with Jedediah. She told him about her dreams for Lily, her hopes that her daughter would have a better life than she had. She wanted Lily to be strong, independent, and happy. She wanted her to have opportunities that she herself had never had. She spoke of her desire to create a stable and loving home for Lily, a place where she would feel safe and secure. She didn't want Lily to grow up feeling lost and alone, as she had. Jedediah listened patiently, his heart touched by Alara's aspirations. He saw her fierce determination to provide a better future for her child, and he admired her strength and resilience. He realized that Alara, like him, had experienced loss and hardship, but she refused to let it define her. She was determined to create a better life for herself and her daughter, no matter what it took. As the days turned into weeks, Jedediah found himself looking forward to waking up each morning. He enjoyed the company, the laughter, the sense of purpose that Alara and Lily had brought into his life. He watched them interact, their bond growing stronger with each passing day, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth and contentment. He started to see them as more than just temporary guests. He saw them as a new kind of family. Alara was strong and capable, and Lily was a ray of sunshine. They had brought life back into his lonely ranch, filling it with love and laughter. He still didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he didn't want them to leave. He wanted them to stay, to be a part of his life, to help him rebuild his dreams. He wanted a family again. One morning, Lily woke up with a fever. She was listless and wouldn't eat. Alara was frantic with worry. Jedediah examined Lily, his brow furrowed. She was burning up. The blizzard was still raging, making it impossible to travel to town for a doctor. They were completely cut off. Alara paced the floor, her eyes filled with fear. "What are we going to do?" she cried. Jedediah tried to reassure her, but he was worried too. He knew that babies could get sick quickly, and without medical attention, things could get serious. He racked his brain, trying to think of something, anything, they could do to help her. The storm raged outside, and inside, a tiny life hung in the balance. They were completely alone. Despite his initial gruffness, Jedediah stepped up. He helped Alara cool Lily's fever with damp cloths, his large hands surprisingly gentle. He stayed up through the night, taking turns with Alara to watch over the baby, making sure she was breathing comfortably. They worked together seamlessly, their shared concern for Lily overriding any awkwardness or hesitation. Alara trusted Jedediah's instincts, and Jedediah admired Alara's unwavering devotion to her daughter. As they sat vigil by Lily's bedside, they shared stories and whispered hopes, their voices hushed with worry and exhaustion. They were no longer just strangers sharing a house. They were a team, united by their love for this tiny, vulnerable child. Their bond, forged in the crucible of crisis, grew stronger with each passing hour. The blizzard outside seemed less threatening, their shared purpose a beacon of warmth in the darkness. As the night wore on, Jedediah suddenly remembered something. His grandmother, a wise woman who knew all sorts of folk remedies, used to make a special tea for sick children. It was made with herbs and honey, and it always seemed to do the trick. "Wait," he said, his voice filled with a newfound hope. "I remember something my grandmother used to make." He explained the remedy to Alara, his voice animated with excitement. "It's worth a try," he said. He rummaged through his pantry, searching for the necessary ingredients. He found dried chamomile flowers, a jar of local honey, and some other herbs he couldn't quite identify but knew were safe. He carefully measured out the ingredients, remembering his grandmother's instructions. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Alara brewed the tea, the fragrant steam filling the room with a calming aroma. She carefully spooned a small amount into Lily's mouth, her heart pounding with anxiety. They waited, watching Lily intently, praying for a miracle. Slowly, Lily began to stir. Her breathing became easier, and her fever started to break. She whimpered softly, then opened her eyes and looked at Alara. A weak smile touched her lips. Alara burst into tears of relief, hugging Lily close. Jedediah, his eyes shining with emotion, placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, his touch conveying a silent message of comfort and support. The remedy had worked. Lily was going to be okay. A wave of gratitude washed over them, their hearts overflowing with love and thankfulness. The crisis had passed. The next morning, they awoke to a world transformed. The wind had died down, and the snow had stopped falling. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow on the landscape. The blizzard had finally broken. Jedediah opened the door and stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp, clean air. The ranch was covered in a blanket of white, sparkling in the sunlight. It was a beautiful sight, a symbol of hope and renewal. He looked back at the house, at Alara and Lily standing in the doorway, their faces radiant with joy. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. The storm was over, and a new chapter was about to begin. The world seemed brighter, filled with endless possibilities. Just as Jedediah was starting to feel like he had everything he needed, a wagon rumbled up the long driveway. A woman, sturdy and middle-aged, climbed down, a determined look on her face. She carried a worn-out suitcase and a basket filled with cooking utensils. "I'm Martha," she announced, her voice strong and clear. "I saw your advertisement in Harmony Gulch. I'm here to be your cook." Jedediah stared at her, a mix of surprise and confusion on his face. He had almost forgotten about the advertisement. So much had changed since then. He looked back at Alara and Lily, who were watching from the porch, their expressions unreadable. He knew he had a decision to make. The cook he had longed for had finally arrived, but his heart was telling him something else entirely. Jedediah looked from Martha to Alara, then back again. He thought about the lonely nights, the endless chores, the desperate need for help that had led him to place that advertisement. But those needs seemed so distant now. He had found something far more valuable than a cook. He had found a family. He took a deep breath and made his decision. It wasn't a difficult one, not really. His heart had already made it for him. He walked towards Martha, a determined look on his face. He knew he had to be honest, even if it meant disappointing her. He just hoped she would understand. He was a rancher, not a liar. He had to be true to himself and to the people he now considered his family. "Martha," Jedediah began, his voice sincere, "I appreciate you coming all this way, but I'm afraid I no longer need a cook." He saw the confusion and disappointment in her eyes, and he hurried to explain. "A lot has changed since I placed that advertisement. I found someone who is helping me out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of bills. "Please, take this for your trouble," he said, offering her the money. "It's not much, but I hope it will help with your journey back." Martha hesitated, then accepted the money with a nod. "I understand," she said, her voice tinged with disappointment but also with a hint of understanding. "Sometimes, life takes us in unexpected directions." She smiled faintly. "I wish you all the best." After Martha departed, Jedediah turned to Alara, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a step closer, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Alara," he said softly, "I know I said your stay was temporary, but I've changed my mind." He paused, searching for the right words. "I want you and Lily to stay here with me. Not as a cook, not as hired help, but as family. Help me run this ranch. Help me rebuild my life. Be my family." He held his breath, waiting for her response, his future hanging in the balance. He knew he was asking a lot, but he couldn't imagine his life without them now. He needed them, and he hoped, with all his heart, that they needed him too. Tears welled up in Alara's eyes, but a wide smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Jedediah, we'll stay. We'd love to be your family." She rushed towards him, throwing her arms around him in a tight embrace. He held her close, feeling a surge of happiness and relief wash over him. He looked down at Lily, who was gurgling and reaching out to him, her tiny hand grasping his finger. He knew that life wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and hardships ahead. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had Alara and Lily by his side, and together, they could face anything. They were a family, bound by love, loyalty, and a shared hope for the future. The lonely ranch was now a home. Years passed. The ranch flourished under their care. Jedediah, Alara, and Lily worked side by side, their love and laughter echoing through the valley. The weathered ranch house, once filled with silence and loneliness, was now a warm and inviting home, filled with the sounds of a happy family. Jedediah taught Lily how to ride a horse, just as he had once dreamed of teaching his own children. Alara, with Jedediah's guidance, became an excellent cook, her stews and bread filling the house with delicious aromas. The final scene shows them together, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Jedediah held Lily on his lap, while Alara leaned against him, her hand resting on his arm. They were a family, a testament to the power of love, kindness, and second chances. The lonely rancher had finally found his happily ever after, not with a cook, but with a shivering girl and a newborn baby who knocked on his door during a blizzard. Their future stretched before them, filled with warmth and hope.